Well, the Ducks had a big win on a big stage against Colorado on Saturday, and yeah, that tends to help in the recruiting world. But just how much can it help? We'll talk about that today. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. So if you have not already, like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit, ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Brian Smith is here today, our Locked On Recruiting Insider. Let's hop into it, Brian. Oregon played in front of the largest television audience of anybody by just a little bit when they played Colorado on Saturday. Just over 10 million viewers was kind of the average, and it beat out Ohio State, Notre Dame by a little bit. What does that do for recruiting?
Well, there's really no precedent for it. I saw a stat that the Notre Dame-Ohio State game was like the highest rated game since Notre Dame played Florida State in 93 in the 1-versus-2 matchup. So that just puts it in perspective like that. Those two games just killed it. To be ahead of that is incredible. So hats off to everybody with Oregon and Colorado for getting that going. But how could it not help recruiting? I thought it would be good, but I didn't think it'd be better than the Ohio State Notre Dame game. Those are two blue bloods that have humongous fan bases. I'm going to guess that the way they came out is more important, though, because it's not the number of fans, it's which ones are watching. And recruits are watching, because anything Deion's associated with, they're going to watch. And they were bludgeoned. At one point, I know Bud Elliott made this stat mention, Oregon had 400 and some odd yards of offense, and Colorado had like 60 something. It was like 460 to 60. It was just something absurd.
There was a point in time in the game where Oregon had more points than Colorado had yards in the first half. Like, it was that sort of, Colorado began the game 18 plays for 19 yards. And for recruits watching that, Brian, I can see it going either way of, boy, I want to be a part of what Dan Lanning is building there in Eugene, or, hey, Coach Prime has a lot of appealing elements and he just needs a player like me. When you talk to recruits, how do they view a game like this and the way it plays out?
A little bit of both from what you said. You're astute to mention that, because some kids just want to be the extra guy that kind of puts the team over the top, and that would be Oregon's case. They're close to where they need to be, but not quite. In Colorado's case, it's a long way to go. They've got, I would say, 5-6 guys that are in their two deep that would consist, outside of Shador and obviously Travis, who didn't play, that would play any significant minutes for the Ducks. It's just true. They're not even in the same stratosphere, especially on defense. They don't have the defensive linemen they need. They just don't. And they got beat up so bad up front. It was 2nd and 5 anytime Oregon wanted it to be 2nd and 5. You give a senior quarterback like Bo Nix that. So the Oregon recruits are going to be like, man, can I jump on this? Yeah. But Dan has to convince kids you may not play quite as much as if you went to Colorado, but you're going to win. Where Deion's like, look, bro, you're going to play now. It just depends on the kid. Everybody's got their own perspective. Deion's recruiting okay, but they're not killing it. They have to do portal for another year or two. It's hard to get kids to go to Colorado. It's not exactly the easiest place. And Oregon's used to that, but at least Oregon's right next to California, and they kill it in that state. So I think the Ducks are going to really make some hay with this. And that's why I texted you earlier, like, in a week or so, we'll have more data. But right now, I just think it's going to help them. But about another week, we're going to know a lot more.
Yeah, there was a big visitor list at the game. Plenty of 2024 kids who have already committed to the Ducks. Guys like Dakota Fields, Fox Crater. There were others. Jeremiah McLaughlin, the wide receiver, commit to Ohio State. He was at the game. I mean, it was quite the game to be able to watch. I mean, if you're gonna talk about a flip down the line, that's certainly the sort of impression you'd want to make. But Ohio State is wide receiver. I'm not anticipating that comes to fruition necessarily, but if you're looking at, the lineup that they had, and there were, 15, 20 kids, I think, in total, and maybe about 8 to 10 of them have already committed to the Ducks. For those kids, Brian, is that just them being able to double down on, Oregon is the place I want to be. This is what I want to be a part of, seeing the stadium, the way the team played, seeing shout between the third and fourth quarters. Like, is that really what those kids who have already verbally committed to the Ducks take away from it?
I think that's part of it. I think it's just fun. I mean, there aren't many places that are better than Outson Stadium for a college football atmosphere. I'm sure as a Ducks fan, you'll agree with that.
I do agree with that sentiment, yes.
Good for you. But I've never even been to a Ducks game, but it's obvious. I mean, it's really loud. The people are into it. It's part of the culture of the state of Oregon. All of that is cool. Why would you not go? And it's a free ticket too. I mean, you get to go to that game for free and get a good seat, hang out, talk to people. I think it's more the entertainment than anything at this point. For Lanning, just to be clear, for Lanning and his staff, the number one reason is you want to build bonds and all that. But the hidden reason is if they're here, they can't be somewhere else. That's just true too, because everybody's trying to pluck somebody else's recruits. I mean, that never changes. So it works out well for Oregon on all fronts.
One thing that didn't work out as well on the recruiting front for Oregon is Brandon Baker, number one offensive tackle in the class from Mater Dei. He ends up choosing Texas. Oregon was in the mix. Nebraska was in the mix. Ohio State kind of got in the fold, but not as much. Oregon's recruited, and they're not done recruiting at Mater Dei. We'll talk about his 5-star teammate in just a moment as well. But what can you tell us about Brandon Baker and Oregon, still going after those 5 stars in 2024? Haven't been able to land one just yet. Of course, I think our inclination should be to trust Lanning and company on building a roster based on the team they've put together here for 2023. But Baker was a guy that they wanted. Do you have anything on why he ended up choosing Texas?
I think part of it is just Texas is really good right now. I mean, they beat Alabama, man. That carries a lot of cachet. So I get it. I mean, it's not a typical Alabama team, but when was the last time Alabama lost by 10 at home? I mean,
it's been a long time.
That's what I mean. Like, do you think that Texas sent a few mailers out about that? Do you think a few text messages would you have, if you were a head coach or an assistant at Texas, maybe have mentioned that to Brandon Baker? Like, they just have a lot of advantages, and it is Texas. I know Oregon fans probably hate Texas, it's, for a lot of reasons, but it's not very hard to recruit there. I don't know.
We beat them in the Alamo Bowl years ago, and they haven't been as relevant as Oregon in the last 10 years. I don't know if we have like a specific reason to say I can't stand Texas or anything like that.
It's just because they get so much attention, because they make the media a lot of money, because they have the biggest freaking fan base.
Well, it's still not anything like Colorado. Like, there has definitely been a hype machine for Texas over the years that has bugged me from time to time.
The Colorado thing is weird.
The Colorado thing is over the top. Well, it's because like Dion is such a polarizing figure, like the likes of which we haven't seen, and he's not new. Like, he's been a part of the American sports conversation
for 35 years.
For a long
almost
time.
40.
And now he's going into a world of coaching that has a lot of history, tradition, power, influence amongst other coaches that they care about, and he is a disruptor in that space, and that in turn gets people riled up on one side or the other. But I mean, it helped Oregon, by the way. Let me make that very clear. Like,
100%.
Oregon, Colorado.
He brought them attention they wouldn't have got otherwise.
100%. And that's why we're talking about it on today's show. Like, there's a benefit to beating Colorado like that on TV. Yeah, it helps in your national perception. Oregon went up a slot in the AP poll because Colorado was ranked. We beat them that badly. Everybody was watching, but it helps with the visibility because guess what? Colorado's the hottest name in college sports. You go out and drub them 42-6, and guess what? You get on people's radar. And as you've talked about many times before, Oregon knows how to have kids on for a visit. One that we would like to see get on a visit and then commit to the Ducks is Aiden Breeland, Brandon Baker's teammate. Brian's going to give us an update on that. But if you missed something at the grocery store, as I do regularly, like I forgot the Parmesan cheese the other day.
By the way.
I forgot the Parmesan cheese. It was on my list and I just forgot. But guess what? Now DoorDash Grocery is there to help you out, to get something that you forgot or just get your groceries delivered. If you love the convenience of getting what you want right to your door, DoorDash Grocery Delivery is there for you. You can stock up on last minute cravings or stock up for the week, whatever you want. You've trusted DoorDash to deliver your restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivery that actually delivers too. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout. Limited time offer. Terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKEDONCollege. Don't forget, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. All right, let's keep rolling here with Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting insider. Oregon's still chasing that first 5-star in 2024. It's still the number 12 class in the country without it. So it's not as if there's a lack of talent in that class on both sides of the ball. But Aiden Breeland is kind of the next 5-star name that Oregon fans who are, talking about recruiting, which a lot of us are following here. One of the top defensive linemen in the class, an interior guy from modern day. Oregon's kind of been in this running for a while. What is the latest on Mr. Breeland?
He recently went to Athens, Georgia to see the Dogs for an unofficial. And like I told you, follow what the kids do, not what they say. In his recruitment, he's not exactly talking to a ton of people anyway. But now the question is very simple. Does Oregon get him back on campus this fall? If they do not, they're not getting him. I would bet heavily on that. You would think they would, but at the same time, you got to see it. You usually go and sign where you've taken the most visits or at least close to it. And the ones closer to signing day can be telling. I don't know his schedule, but obviously Miami's another possibility, but that's another school across the country. That's going to be hard for them, I would imagine. I think it's going to be Oregon or Georgia, and it's going to come down to whether or not they can get him back up there. And Oregon's recruiting forever. So I don't think there's a lot more to see. It's just he's talked to every coach forever because everybody knew about him for years. This is a special player. So he just went to Georgia. Oregon needs to counter and get him back up to Eugene.
Yeah, and with Breeland, he's a guy who would join, a slew of talented defensive line commits, not just from 2023, but in 2024 as well. Guys like Zadavian Sims for next year's class and the like. And there's certainly several other names that are in there. But I think if Oregon were to land him, he would certainly be kind of the headline recruit of the 2024 class. Because anytime you get a 5-star, it's going to be kind of the headline recruit. Because those are oftentimes the guys who can make an impact right away. Now, it's not always that way. Jurion Dickey was a late enrollee. He hasn't had a role in the Oregon offense so far this year. Mateo Uiagalelei was an early enrollee. He is a regular player and someone you basically consider a starter for the Ducks on their defense this year. But then Tatum Tuioti was a 3-star recruit in a lot of places. He's played a ton. Blake Purchase was a 4-star. He's played a ton. So, it depends. It certainly depends, but Oregon's going to have a lot of rotation on the defensive line from this year to next year. So if Breeland were to come in, I think he'd have the chance to play right away. There would be guys ahead of him from an experience standpoint, but he is a really, really special talent. And I think if you're talking about when Oregon can get him on campus again, Brian, we talked about this before the season on the recruiting front. The Ducks don't have a home game now until Washington State. Yeah,
that's so they play really random stretch.
They play 3 of their first 4 at home. Then they won't be at home for a full calendar month because this week Stanford, that's 1 week. Second week bye week. Third week Washington, and then the fourth week they come back and they play Washington State. There's also the USC game. If Breeland, whose timeline I think looks like it's going towards the early National Signing Day, at least in December, if that's the case. If I'm the Ducks, I'd probably look at the USC game and say, this is the most high-profile one you're going to want to be at.
Game day might be there.
Game day could be there. And if you could have a recruit come for that, that would probably be the ideal target for it, right?
That's an automatic. You don't even have to do anything besides put him on the golf cart and have some intern ride him around. For real.
Yeah.
Like, kids are visual. Don't make it complex. I think he has a pretty good idea what Lanning's doing on the field. I'm sure he watched some of the Colorado game too.
Yeah.
And it's not, and we pull in all those guys. They do a good job. They need to figure out different ways now to get over the hump, though, and getting back on campus. The rest will take care of itself. The golf cart aside, if you get him on campus to see USC, whether they're there or not, that's cool, man. Like, if he doesn't want to be a part of that, then you put your best foot forward. It is what it is. I mean, what else can you do? So Oregon's got a great product to sell, and they got a great fan base. Just got to get him back on campus.
Yeah, and if the defense continues putting up efforts like they did against Colorado, now they have, as I talked about in yesterday's show, bigger challenges ahead than the Buffs. They won't be able to just maul every offensive line, but I love the way the secondary covered. So when they play Washington and USC, you put up a defensive performance that, you're not going to hold either of those teams to 6 points. That's just not going to happen. But if you held them to, 21, 24.
Oh, absolutely.
Then that starts to, right. I think that starts to grow the brand of, hey, Oregon is building this sort of defensive unit that you want to be a part of. I want to get you out of here on today's show, Brian, and then I have some mailbag questions I'll answer to wrap up today's show. Oregon, after the Colorado game, did land a commitment from a 5-star defensive lineman. His name is Tony Cumberland. He is the class of 2026. Now, most of you may be checking your watch or phone to say, wait a minute, isn't today, September, insert whatever day you're listening to or watching this show, 2023? The answer is yes, you're correct. You have not gone into a time machine here. This is a 2026 recruit who says his commitment or his recruitment is closed. He's committed to the Ducks. Look, I think that's great and everything. Consider me skeptical that Oregon is able to just stop recruiting a kid who won't actually decide until 2 years and 3 months from now is when he could sign his national letter of intent. Am I crazy for thinking that?
No. I think you're crazy for many other things. This is not one of them. Your grocery list aside, look, his film, I went and watched it. Like, he has no technique yet, but like, you watch him, just his frame, the way he moves. If I didn't know what class he was in, I would say he's a raw 3-star kid that's a senior that just needs technique. But like, his frames are, but he's got 2 years of high school and he's 250 and yoked. Like, he's way developed. He's not a kid that necessarily needs to get a whole lot bigger. He's around 250, 275. He'll be good. He'll be a strong side end 3 tech. He's going to be fine. But the way he changes direction, the way he bends and all that, can't teach it. So he'll be just fine. He just has to continue to get better. They're going to have to recruit him just like he wasn't committed, to answer your question, because Arizona's going to recruit him, UCLA, A&M, everybody. I consider Oregon the leader. That's how I look at that.
Well, that's an early contender for the best class in the country in 2026. So
there you go.
Take that,
there
Oregon.
You go.
Take that, Oregon haters. Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider. He's at FBScout_Florida on Twitter. Go check him out. Brian, appreciate it.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Always love having Brian on. And recruiting is just crazy. And you think about what it takes to prepare for an opponent each week while you are hosting kids on visits and you have to remember names. This is why this is a whole big giant staff operation that is running a Power 5 football program or any college football program for that matter. There are a lot of people behind the scenes. Speaking of behind the scenes, I would like to give a very special shout out, and a deserved one, to one Scott Anderson. So some of you might not know who Scott is, but you should know who he is, which is why I'm shouting him out on the show. Scott was hired inside the athletic department for the Ducks this year to basically put together, social media content and clips and everything. I don't know exactly what his job description is. I know the most important part of it, though. In each game, he has put together these 5-ish minute videos that basically recap every game with highlights and audio from the television broadcast, audio from Jerry Allen and Mike Jorgensen, which I think is great because those two are among the best in the biz, to ever do it. And they have just been legends in the Oregon community and such. the audio that he picks up, the quality of the films, the intensity, the tone, the music, the HD shots. I mean, it was outstanding. Colorado was the best one yet. The Texas Tech one with the silver wings was outstanding as well. It's all been great. The Colorado one, if you haven't seen it, just go find it because it's phenomenal stuff. And that is a hire that is never going to make any noise. But my goodness, does that help project an image of professionalism, intensity, and commitment to the football program with the content that he's putting out there? He deserves a big shout out. So he gets one here on the show. And I know many of you have seen his work. You've probably all seen it. It's awesome. And there are people all over the country, not just Oregon fans, that have picked up on his videos and gone, whoa, this is good. This is really, really good. It is a high quality product. So too is the Jase case from Jase Medical. So the Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jase case is fill out a simple online form and in some cases, jump on a quick call with one of their board-certified physicians. You don't want to be caught unprepared in today's world. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jase handles everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Jase Medical is simple. Go online, fill out a form, get a prescription, life-saving medications right to your door. Get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics from Jase Medical by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Enter that code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your Jase case. Okie dokie. It's time for my favorite part of every single show. The mailbag is always open. If you want priority mailbag questions, go join the Locked On Ducks SUBTEXT community. Free 14-day trial, then $5 a month after that. Not a requirement at all. The show will always be free and available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. At Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks or the Twitter handles, DMs and mentions wide open. YouTube comments a great way to get your questions answered as well. I will say sometimes the volume of comments on YouTube can be high and I can miss them or not see them or they don't show up. So if you want to be sure that you get a question in, SUBTEXT is the best way to do it, but shoot me a message on Twitter is also probably just a little bit more sure. But YouTube comments, I'm still going to look at those. So this from Water Bottle with 2 A's. Spencer, Oregon showed a flash of good defense last year against Utah at home, and it fizzled out for the rest of the season. To me, this year feels different. Great tackling, hard-hitting team, fast to the ball, and pressure everywhere. Do you think they can maintain that level of play moving forward through this schedule? Kyrie Jackson played out of his mind, 3 incredible plays on the ball. Yeah, I talked about Kyrie Jackson on yesterday's show. He was one of the individual standouts, and he earned it because, much like Scott Anderson deserved a shout out, so too did Kyrie Jackson because he had an outstanding football game and looked like a lockdown corner. Now, like the rest of the team, he's going to go up against better wide receivers, but Xavier Weaver and Jimmy Horn, those guys are not slouches. That was a really good passing offense that Oregon kept in check in a major way beyond what I even expected. And I think that was a great sign. Now, as I also pointed out on yesterday's show and kind of just mentioned, bigger challenges lie ahead. Washington's receiving core is disgustingly good. Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Jeremy Bernard. That is as great a 4-deep at the wideout position as you can possibly be. Like they're on par with Ohio State. Not close to that level. They are on par. I could argue they're above and deeper, but Marvin Harrison's the best individual receiver in the country. They've got Emeka Ibuka as well. Their number 3 guy, I think, is also pretty good. Like Washington's receivers are legit. USC has some big time receivers. Zachariah Branch, the true freshman, is explosive and a tough guy to defend. Brendan Rice is really good. Taj Washington is a good player. Mario Williams is still there. Like they have tremendous depth. I don't think they have a high-end guy like a Marvin Harrison at Ohio State or a Rome Odunze at Washington, but I think we can expect Oregon's defense to be improved. They are clearly capable of that because at no point last season did they look the way that they look right now defensively. So I think we can expect them to continue to play at a high level. But when we play USC and Washington, we're not holding those teams to no points in the first half. USC would be the more likely of the two at home, but guess what? That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Colorado's a great story, not a great team. USC and Washington are great teams with great weapons and great coaches. And when you go up against those sorts of teams, they're going to score points. You have to try and limit it as much as you can. I think anything under 30 for both of those games gives us a good opportunity to win. But no, you can't play at this level. Now, on the tackling front, yeah, Oregon can continue to tackle like they have. I mean, remember last year against Georgia, all the missed tackles and not making plays in space? I agree. Through the first 4 weeks, I think we've done that really, really well. That we can expect to continue at the same level that we have seen. But in terms of the coverage and the pressure on quarterbacks, it's not going to continue at this rate, but it still should be above what we saw from a season ago. But I agree that we're fast to the ball, pressure, hard hitting, like everything is there to be a better defensive unit. But those units offensively we'll go up against are really, really good. This one from Nathan. I'm trying to figure out what we still need to learn about this team. What's your biggest question? I think it's whether we can win on the road, right? Run blocking. Can we beat a legit offense that can match up with us in the trenches? Or maybe a question is how many teams can match up with us in the trenches? So I think there are two questions that remain to be seen here. Number one, can the offensive line block in the ground game against better front sevens? Now, Texas Tech, I think, has a good front seven, and they held up very well in pass protection. But remember, the running game was a struggle on that particular day. It was not a struggle against Colorado. It was utterly dominant. We could run the ball whenever we wanted to. A 2nd and 21 became 1st and 10, and all we did was hand the ball off up the middle. But that's a Colorado front seven that's not very good. So when you go up against Washington or even USC, you go up against Oregon State or Utah, for instance, or Washington State, those teams are going to have much better front sevens that you have to try and block in the run game. So though I liked what I saw against Colorado, I think that's still a question. I don't really have questions in the pass protection realm because I think Texas Tech has got a good front four and Bo Nix was not under pressure all day. Is the offensive line going to be as good as they were last year? Going up against, the Huskies, for instance, probably not quite as good, but are they clearly capable of being 90% of what they were last year? Yeah, I think they are. I think the run blocking is still a question because they'll go up against better fronts, but I feel really good about them in pass pro. I mean, through 4 games, Bo Nix has been sacked, I think, just twice. It's been really, really good once again. Part of that is scheme, part of that is Bo, and a big part of that, obviously, is the offensive line. I think the other teams that on both sides of the ball that can match up in the trenches with Oregon, you look at Washington for sure. Oregon State offensively might have the best offensive line in the league. They're certainly one of them. Utah on both sides of the ball, USC with their offensive line, and the Trojans' defensive line is much improved, but their defense has also given up 28 points this year to San Jose State and Arizona State, and that's not great. That's, they still, I think, have some defensive questions, though they're improved. I'd say the biggest challenges are the Washington State defensive line, the Oregon State offensive line, and then Washington and Utah on both sides of the ball. For the Cougars, their offensive line, I don't love it. It's fine, but I don't think it's the biggest challenge Oregon will face this year in that front. I think that Oregon State's offensive line is really good, but their defensive line, not so good. So those are kind of the units that I look at and say that presents a real challenge, and that's a unit that, from what I have seen, has been excellent for their respective teams, but Oregon has the opportunity to play better than them. It might just come down to the day, might come down to who's healthy, might come down to the scheme and how the game is playing out, but I like what I've seen in the trenches from Oregon on both sides of the football, and we know that's where a lot of the stuff starts. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, go Ducks.